Righty, welcome. Hello everyone. If you're here for the wireless emergency intranet talk, then you're in the right spot. Anyone in the wrong spot? Way in the back. Thanks, Kenneth.
Are you here?
It's Eric. Alrighty, got a couple more folks coming in. We'll go ahead and get started. I've got quite a bit to cover. It's a very large, broad topic, so I'm going to try to focus down on a couple specific areas that are hopefully interesting to folks. And hopefully projectors are happy. Don't touch anything, Kurt.
Nope.
We're good. So if there are areas that are more interesting to you that we want to focus on a little bit, we can try to gear the presentation in that direction, or I can stay afterwards for half an hour or whatever and continue chatting about specific sub areas. So first off, who am I? I'm Marcel, Alpha India 6 Mike Sierra. I was licensed 2008 down at Cal Poly, hence the Cal Poly shirts everywhere. How many Cal Poly folks in the crowd? Yay! Yeah, a couple that I don't recognize. Excellent. And yeah, I work as a hardware systems engineer at Amazon, and I'm involved with a number of little groups. Cupertino Aries. Anyone here from Cupertino Aries? Couple, yeah. Cal Poly, we already did that one. All out events, events communications, and then Salinas Valley Repeater Group. Shout out Joe and a couple others. Yeah, that's a fun little group. 14 linked repeaters. How many do you have now?
15.
15. I can't even keep count. All right. So the abstract for today. I'd like to go through this project called ARKnet. This is a project that we're doing for the City of Cupertino, and I'll spend a little bit at the beginning with a couple wordy slides, because I think one of the challenges that people always have when they're working on new and exciting amateur radio things is why we're doing this, right? So we have a lot of technology, and there are things we can do, but they're not always very useful. We don't always think about what the actual application is and what we're going to use it for. So, and then I always say this is a bidirectional QSO, so please do ask questions, raise your hand. Hecklers are not preferred, but if that's the only way to get my attention, then we'll see. Okay, so we'll kind of focus. So let's start off with kind of what is ARKnet? What can we, how is this basic system set up? Why did we choose to set this up this way? What is it used for? And then I'll go into the details are kind of in the actual sector site selection and deployment strategy, and kind of what we've learned so far in this project, and then where we're going with it. So what kind of the next steps are for this project specifically, and how that ties into some of the many, many other similar projects that are running in Santa Clara County as well and globally. So first off, Cupertino. Who knows where Cupertino is? Okay, good. We can skip that part. 60,000 people, 11 square miles, home of Apple computers and a bunch of other high tech. And Cupertino Aries has about 70 members on their roster. So that's kind of the amateur radio emergency services group that is under the city. So they're part of what's known as the Cupertino Citizens Corps, the 3 Cs, which includes the Aries group, the CERT group, Community Emergency Response Team, and the MRC, the Medical Reserve Corps. So those are their 3 primary volunteer groups that report into this. They all work together. So the little background, there's this little thing in the bottom, the Cupertino Citizen Corps Technology Roadmap. Back in 2012, they sat down and said, hey, this is pretty cool. We have a ton of volunteers. What are the areas that we can identify that we'd like to get some more coverage in? What would we like to improve in our systems? And they kind of sat down and identified a specific list. Okay, ready? Wordy slide? Okay. So when they think about how Cupertino activates in an emergency, they have these things called ARKs located around the city, which are shipping containers filled with emergency supplies. The thought is that in an emergency, groups will self-organize and deploy into these neighborhoods to assist the community. So these provide localized areas for community members to come get assistance, both medical assistance, to communicate infrastructure safety assessments from the CERT teams, to provide kind of analysis, like in an earthquake situation, how to get the information between these locations. Of course, the assumption commercial systems may not work. The emergency response effectiveness relies on a couple things, and blah, blah, blah. So the key things to highlight here are converge around ARKs, quality, timely information, and improve information sharing. So they highlighted in this report, new technologies are available, right? We all kind of know that. They'd be kind of cool. So how many people play with mesh networking? A lot of people like mesh networking. What's one of the big downsides of like the WRT mesh networking systems? Low power frequencies.
Everyone else on the same frequency.
Yeah, everyone's on the same frequency, and you're kind of stuck to usually a smaller area unless you do some big antenna stuff, and it's very ad hoc. So those are some of the things we considered as we were looking at how can we use new technologies to improve information sharing, right? So then we look at ARKnet as a whole. This is at Cupertino City Hall, and yes, that's one of our sites up at the top, that little thingy right there. And then kind of sat down, how can we use technology to improve this, right? So things that we want to do include connecting everything together, right? So we want an emergency wireless network that connects these critical areas around the city together. So that's these ARCs primarily, plus fire stations, service centers, traffic centers, the Emergency Operations Center, City Hall, those sorts of places. And it's used by the citizen core and city staff as needed. You'll notice how citizen core and city staff includes a lot of folks that are not ham radio operators, right? So that's one of the design criteria that we came with. And the primary thing here is that we're supporting the city's need for an accurate and timely formation of the situation. So this is kind of as part of the infrastructure safety assessment and your initial response to a large incident, knowing what the problem is 90% of solving the problem, right? So if we can better provide and have a better mechanism for informing emergency responders what the issue is, where our biggest problems are, that's going to be 90% of it. So how can we do this? So one was through phone links. So it seems kind of silly, but when the phone system goes down and you can't pick up a phone to call different places, how do you communicate? Well, amateur radio, Marcel, use amateur radio. We have this repeater that the City of Cupertino has. We should use that. Well, yes, that works, and that works very well, and it works very well for coordinating folks, and we all know that. Things that it doesn't work well for is when you don't have amateur radio operators at those locations, when you need to pass information that you don't want publicly spread out on a large frequency that everyone's listening to. That can be anything from medical stuff, confidential nature response, law enforcement response, if there's a riot in some area and you don't want to let everyone know to go over to where the riot is, those sorts of things. Hazard and situational awareness. So generally, we thought video monitoring might be a cool thing if you could have maybe not real time, maybe a couple frames a second type of thing of what's going on at each of these locations. You could quickly look at one screen and say, hey, we've got a line of 600 people at this one ARC that are trying to get Band-Aids. Maybe we need to send some more volunteers to this ARC. Or, hey, this other ARC is completely decimated and the whole field is on fire and all the houses don't exist in that area. Maybe we need to spend some fire response to that area. So if you're not able to reach those people with traditional voice communications, this might be a way that technology can help us improve the response to those areas. Other things, file sharing, reference documents. It's always hard to get everyone organized in these situations. WebEOC is a way to kind of pass messages as well, tie everything together, do better emergency response. And then instant messaging, surprisingly useful. We have them running at all our large events that we do support for, and people just chat and throw stuff in there. Oh, what was that bib number again? Or just throwing information back and forth.
Is WebEOC? I've never heard of that before.
I think that might be a Cupertino specific one.
Yeah, no, it's a project internal to Cupertino. They're developing their own computer-aided dispatch system. Okay.
Yeah, and then Kevin has something to comment.
Yeah, there is WebEOC. It's a commercial product. Hawaii Emergency Management Agency uses it, and the counties also.
Okay, so it's a commercial product that you can use for that, and Brent's about to add to that?
No.
Another question. Yes.
So if you want to finish that one.
Okay, so yeah, WebEOC is a product that you can use that does emergency operations center management type stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one of the big issues with CERT, I think, is everything has some kind of form to be filled out.
Yes.
Whether it's person or equipment or dispatch or team.
Yep.
And there's a lot of photocopying going on. Is there any notion of online form or tracking going on?
Great question. So N2CJ and Brent asked the question, in CERT there are a lot of forms that get filled out. A lot of people are filling forms out, making photocopies, throwing stuff around. Is there any notion of incorporating that here? Yes, that kind of goes to Kenneth's point. There's an effort from the CERT portion of the Citizens Corps to do what they're calling, what is it, data I forget what it's called, like data automation project effectively, where they're using things like WebEOC, they're looking at using iPads, other technology methods to digitize some of these forms and make that sharing. So that's kind of where this project came out as well, is they were saying, oh, each of the ARCs will have a little server running, and then we can have that all linked, and then periodically through Packet we'll sync those servers to each other. And we're like, well, that sounds like a bad idea. So how can we maybe make that better? So part of this is, yes, each local node has an access point that brings you into this network, and the thought would be that some of this message passing is actually formal ICS communication packet passing. So you're not sitting there. We do communications drills annually or biannually where it takes hours to transmit 50 messages because you're having to read through every single line item, check it back and forth, and if anyone's done ICS, you know how much of a pain that is. So, great questions. Okay, anything about what it is? Good. All right, so system design overview. So this is where I'd like to get into kind of what the sites are we're trying to connect in Cupertino and what approach we took to try to address how to connect all these sites together. So this is a map of the City of Cupertino, roughly. All the green dots are the ARCs. So these are the shipping containers spread throughout the city. The blue dots are city-related infrastructure or response locations. Those include the traffic center, the service center that has like all the trucks that do street maintenance and power line related stuff with PG&E. The Quinlan Center and Senior Center and Sports Center, those are locations that would be shelters. The W6 TDM repeater site, the Emergency Operations Center, and then the red dots are fire stations in Cupertino. So these are all the kind of identified locations that would be nice to have access into ARKnet at. So we look at that and we think, okay, well, how can we hook all these together? And there are many ways we could hook these together. We could put 200-foot towers at each one. We could do a LiDAR system between all the sites. I'm kidding. You could do IRDA is the thing, right? So if you wanted to. You could do mesh networking between these locations. You could do lower frequency stuff, 900 meg or UHF even, and do a backbone that way, and those do exist in the county. We looked at it and said, in order to meet kind of some of those design things that we'd like to do as a nice to have and kind of the stretch goal, be able to do video type things, or at least low frame rate video and image sharing, you really need stuff in the kind of megahertz bandwidth to be able to make it, megabits bandwidth to be able to make it useful, right? So in order to do that, we're kind of down to more the line of sight, higher frequency bands. So we looked at doing a point-to-multipoint system. And for those not familiar, it's kind of like a cell phone site. So you have one central site that is your sector site, as we call it in this case. And that's where all of your traffic goes through. That obviously has downsides because it's one site that all your traffic goes through. It also has an upside that it's one site that you need to maintain and take care of and protect and fix when something goes wrong, or if the earthquake knocks out everything, you only have to go fix one site before everything comes back up, for example. The routing is a lot easier from a networking perspective, lower latency because you're only going through one location as opposed to a mesh system, where if you're now trying to go, if we go back to here, and if we're going from Hyde Arc and it's meshed to the EOC, and then you're trying to send an image through Lawson to Garden Gate to the service center, you'd have 4 or 5 hops maybe. That clogs up your whole network as 2 locations are trying to do that. With a single sector site, you can kind of optimize that. But there are concerns. So lack of route redundancy is a big one. As soon as that tree sways in front of that antenna, that site just dropped off the air. As soon as the sector site, anything happens to the sector site, your whole network goes down until you get that back up and running. And then the line of sight concern is a big one with our implementation. So making sure you can actually get a link from point A to point B. So we'll focus on that a little bit. A short aside on networking equipment. We chose for this project to use Microtix equipment. A lot of folks use Ubiquiti's equipment as well. The nano bridges are really familiar. We liked Microtix because they have their routers built into them. And you literally put one little thing on a high point on a mast, and it does both your uplink and downlink antenna, and it does all your routing and your network management. So you can pretty much have everything just run off of that. Their website has a wide variety of radios that you can use for this. So they have 90-degree beamwidth sector antennas, all the way down to 10-degree point-to-point links, and then a bunch of radios like this net metal that you can hook up to any dish that you want with 2, 3, 4 streams simultaneous with multiple polarizations. So you can do some pretty fancy stuff with this. Gave us a lot of flexibility, and they're pretty cheap to roll out as well. So it's something we can start with. Question?
What's the price range?
On the right there, 120 to 170. Don't worry.
Head in the way.
So,
Need coffee or else.
but yeah, no, they're relatively inexpensive. It's kind of the same range as Ubiquity's equipment. It's the kind of low-end commercial stuff. If you're going up higher to like the big fancy ISPs, they're using different frequencies as well. This is all the 5 gigahertz stuff is kind of what we chose. Why 5 gigahertz, not 2.4? Well, interference, right? Everyone's on 2.4, and there are 3 channels that you can use on 2.4. So on 5 gig, there are many. Yes.
What was the site again? Microtik?
Microtik. I've got a bunch of links at the end of the presentation, and I will be posting the presentation to my QRZ page after it too. So, yeah.
Are these more ham? Is this basically self licensed hardware, or is this ham band?
Great question. Yeah, I've got a little bit on that later. These are Part 15, but they can go into the ham band depending on the models you buy. You can get them that are ham capable, and then you can use higher power and different frequencies.
Nice.
Yeah.
Is this similar to the Ubiquity stuff?
Yeah, very similar to the Ubiquity. Yep.
TCP, right? TCP IP?
Yeah, it's all IP-based stuff. So, yeah, and most of these, I think all of these can be powered over Ethernet as well. So PoE, that was another useful thing for us. It keeps your voltage domains a little bit more simple, but I'll show you later, not always. Okay, so that's kind of the high-level premise. So we did a quick pilot program to kind of present this to the city when they came up and said, hey, we like this. We said, hey, that'd be a fun project. Let's kind of see what we could do with it. So we did a little test between the Emergency Operations Center. We bounced it off of one of the taller apartment buildings in the middle of Cupertino, and then talked to one of the ARKs out at Hyde Middle School. And we threw little solar panels and battery on the roof with some sandbags and said, hey, can we make this work? So Kenneth in the back there was the one who spearheaded this pilot program, and it worked. We are sitting there, and there's a live video stream with a phone line running between the EOC and this ARK, which is really cool. And the city was like flabbergasted. They're like, wait, this is running off-grid? This is completely without any network infrastructure or anything? We're like, yeah. And if we turn the camera, you can see the entire campus, and you can see the 2,000 people sitting on the lawn, because they're out of their houses or whatever, right? So they saw tremendous value in this, and they said, absolutely, we want you to go do this. So we said, and then they're like, how much do you need to get started? I don't know, $10,000. Okay, here's $12,000, go have fun, right? Literally. So we're like, okay, so let's start doing this. So we sat down, and challenge number 1 for a point-to-multipoint site, the one thing that you need is that first point. You need that sector site. So all these little antennas pointing at one big antenna. Okay, so here's the city of Cupertino again. Red outline is the actual city boundary all around the edges. All the stars are those sites earlier as well. How would you connect all these together? I'm a tower climber, so I'd say, okay, at the intersection of DeAnza and Stevens Creek Boulevard, let's put a 2,000-foot tower right there and just have everything point at it. That'd be great, right? Put Sutro Tower right in the middle of Cupertino.
Yeah.
I would be so happy. Right?
Yeah.
Cupertino is notorious for not allowing even anything over 10 feet to go up without like neighborhood reviews and HOAs and everything. So, ironically, where the cell phone was effectively invented in that area, or one of the mainstream ones, it has terrible cell phone service. I had better cell phone service in the middle of West Africa than I did in Cupertino until recently. Not even kidding. Okay, so when we look at this, the kind of things that are a challenge here is we have these 2 sites that are close to the foothills, right? You'll notice this is kind of the edge of the foothills. And they're both close to it, but they're far apart, right? So if we sit down and said, okay, what is high up that's natural, that doesn't come down in an earthquake? Mountains, usually they don't move too much. So we kind of identified all these little green dots and said, well, these could all potentially work for us to be able to reach these 2 sites plus everything else, right? The other ones are pretty easy. They're further away from the edge of the mountains, not as big of a problem. But you can see if we go down here, this guy can see, all of these sites, but it gets shaded up here and can't see that site. Similarly, back here up towards Rancho San Antonio, you can see out here, but then actually this guy blocks some of these lower. So it's actually really challenging to find a site that can see things. So we identified, I think, 3 or 4 that actually worked out well. So we actually plotted them out and said, hey, this could work. This is a program, Radio Mobile. It's a great one from some Canadian guy. Super easy to use. They have an online version or a downloadable version. Highly recommend. And give money to him because he does it in his spare time. But this, kind of plot out. And this actually covers all our sites. So it has line of sight to all of our sites. You say, well, what is this site? Well, this site is one that we ended up at. We had, I think, 2 or 3 others we went to first and tried to, who owns this property? Check the parcel maps. Are they interested in us dropping some equipment there that, we could make fully off-grid, or if they happen to be power, it makes it easier. And we ended up with this thing. Well, that's cool. This is an abandoned water tank that's on the Lehigh Permanente cement plant, which is technically Los Altos, I think, but it's just up in the hills. And actually, this is a recent photo. You can actually see our solar panels on it. I was excited. This I saw yesterday when I was putting this together. So this water tank is up on their property, and they were super excited about helping out the City of Cupertino for an emergency site. So we're like, this is great. So we went and visited the site, and this is from Google Maps. Amazing. You can tilt back and 3D it. Oh, I was so excited. Sorry, I had a lot of fun putting this together. So down here is the water tank. And then here you can see all those stars. The one that's missing is further out here on the right. That's the furthest south one. But it's above this ridge line here. That was the key thing. So you can see all these sites. And hey, generally that looks pretty good, right? We can see things. You see all those dark green things that are out there kind of getting in the way? Yeah, trees are a challenge. A very big challenge in some cases. Actually, the site that's down here on the right, it has a wall of like 110-foot trees, like huge redwoods that are just completely blocking any line of sight. So our only option for that site is to put stuff in the trees, which does work. And there's a group up at Orcas Island in Vancouver, Canada, somewhere around there. That's where we actually got some of these ideas from. So they did a really slick setup.
I think a few of those green things are cell towers.
A few of the green ones are cell towers. Not Cupertino. Actually, maybe one, but most of them, yeah, it's super limited. Okay, so that kind of gives you an idea of what we looked like. Distance is also another factor. So if we kind of look back at how far we're going, when we actually look at that distance, the farthest link from this site is about 4.5 miles. So you plug that into some calculators, you can figure out how much free space velocity you have between those 2 points. You have to keep in mind that angle gets lower under the horizon. So when you're at each of these sites and you're looking for the sector site, it's pretty low on the horizon, right? So it's only about 900 feet above ground level, and Cupertino's 100 something. So it is up, but it's only a little bit of enough, right? So it makes it challenging. Yeah.
Did you ever have issues with adjacent or co-channels with other wireless service internet providers?
Great question. Do we ever have any issues with adjacent or co-channel interference with other wireless services? That was one of our biggest concerns. Primary reason for going away from 2.4 gigahertz and going to 5 gig, but it was absolutely a concern. So any internet service provider, ISP, that's using 5 gig access points, of course, that are near any of these sites, if that site, for example, is pointed at us and just 100 yards in front of it, there's an ISP pointed towards Mount Hamilton, they would be blasting into each other, right? And that could seriously mess up that. So far, it looks okay. We don't have full-time monitoring running yet, but we do have a lot of options with frequencies, and we haven't even gotten into the ham bands yet. So right now, we're just sticking to Part 15 channels and going to narrower bandwidth right now, which also helps improve our signal-noise ratio and improve kind of some of those challenges. Yes, Barry?
David.
Oh, David, sorry. Right next to you, sorry.
Be aware that Black Mountain has etheric networks at 5.8, so just basically
Directly behind us.
behind to your left is a 5.8 site.
Correct, and that was part of the challenge, right? So when we're thinking of where we put the sector site and how wide of an antenna you put on this, now anything that's pointed at the hills behind us, so roughly where we are up here is where Black Mountain is, that's a little bit further back. Anything in the greater Silicon Valley, South Bay that's pointed at that hill is now also adding to our noise floor at this receive site, right? So that's definitely something we considered. How can you address that? Well, we can do multiple smaller sector antennas so that only one antenna specifically would get affected, but it could affect a number of users. You could then have different antennas on different frequencies and then have your clients, actively pick and choose the one that has the best signal noise ratio. So those are future expansions that are capable that we can do at this site, but definitely part of the design considerations. Yeah.
What about your clients being interfered with by black? Because
Same
that
question.
seems
Yep.
to be a bigger problem to me.
And I'll actually got some stuff later in the presentation. We can show you a couple of those. So, Kenneth?
Yeah, one of the main things we considered when we designed the channel plan here is we aren't using 20 megahertz channels like everyone else.
Yeah, there you go.
We don't need 150 megabits here. We only need a few, and so we're going with 5 meg channels, which means that even if we're on top of someone else, we only get a quarter of their interference.
Yeah. So if people didn't hear that, so how much channel bandwidth you're using has a big effect on it, right? So we're going to narrow channel bandwidth. I think we're at actually 10 megahertz right now, but we can shuffle that around and it's very flexible as well. So we don't have to go the full bandwidth. Our design criteria for this project was 10 megabits throughput from any site to any site. And that's kind of what we're targeting. Okay, yet. Right now it's just
a radius.
Purely up, and I'll show you how far we've gotten so far too. So just a little point of note too, the largest distance between our two sites right now is 40 degrees beam width from the sector, and we've got a 90 degree beam width antenna on there right now. So if we do have interference and we know it's coming outside of that, we can easily tighten that down, right? And again, you can use you can use 4 10 degree beam width antennas and cover that entire city space, and that would then mean if you did get interference on a single sector, you could at least keep the rest of the network up. We could also do a dedicated link back to the server, which sits at the City Hall, to have a higher bandwidth connection through that site. That's a dedicated point-to-point if we need that. So there's a lot of opportunity to expand, and that was part of the design criteria for this site. Which brings me to the next slide. So design criteria for the site. Commercial off the shelf, that was one, right? I don't want to sit here and build a bunch of custom hardware. I don't want to sit and have to custom, rewrite firmware in assembly line and assemble boards and solder stuff together and be the only person that knows how to put this thing together. I want it to be something that's flexible, reliable, you can buy replacement parts for. All of that stuff you can get from Amazon.com, except for the microtik stuff. So literally, yeah, I'm not even kidding, that solar panel is 6 by 3 feet and it showed up in a big box and it was perfectly fine. So repeatable, flexible, right? Something that we can actually use, that other people can use, that manuals are regularly available online, that there are forums that you can talk to. Those are all important criteria to consider when you pick what equipment to use. The Part 15 versus the Part 97 question that came up. Right now we're using all this equipment in Part 15, which is unlicensed band, but we can switch it to ham frequencies if necessary. The limitation there is that then you get a little bit tricky with what you're allowed to do, right? And you have to turn off encryption, and then, okay, can technically people use third party and use the phone lines if they're not hams? And that's where you get into a lot of gray areas and depending on interpretation. So we'd like to stick with Part 15. It makes it easier for everyone. And then anyone can use it. Any of the Citizens Corps can pull out their phone, log into the system, use a SIP phone app on their phone, right? And talk to anywhere else. They can use an IRC client. They can pull out their iPad and type in their ICS form and send it out to so-and-so. The other thought is generally, when all else fails, off-grid self-powered sites is pretty important. So making these things, at least keeping something up for a couple days is kind of what we'd like to do. Ideally, it's just up there continuously. So one of our sites is currently plugged into AC power, and that's at the Emergency Operations Center, which has generator backup, right? And it'll have a short-term UPS on it as well, just to keep it running. Okay, so sector site design, I think we covered most of that. So the actual sector site itself is actually very simple. So this is the block diagram. You have some solar panels and a solar controller and some batteries. Nothing complicated there. If you went to the 10 o'clock talk, there was an 8 o'clock talk about solar power. Kenneth has a talk online about solar power. You can find solar power information everywhere. I won't go into too much detail on that. We do love these Tracer 2215BN controllers. They're amazing. They're like $150 or something, 20 amps, continuous, all sorts of fun, cool stuff about them, and you can get them on eBay or Amazon, a little more expensive there. Really, really useful. They are actual MPPT controllers. They actually track panels. They automatically select between 12 and 24 volt battery banks. You can set custom profiles and use them with lithium-ion batteries if you wanted to. Like, they're just awesome. And they work really well. Just don't get them wet. Not that we've ever learned that one, Kenneth. And then the other piece of hardware is your actual uplink antenna. So this is a microtik uplink. That one was the SXT SA5, so that's one of their sector antenna ones on 5 gigahertz. It does 90 degree beam width. And it's simple. Again, we can swap that out easily, just unplug it and plug in the other one if we wanted to go to a different beam width or put multiple ones. We just add another PoE injector and plug it in. The Ethernet switch up here, that's both for local configuration and it keeps the LAN active on the router. It just keeps everything happy. And we can easily expand and add more stuff up there. If we wanted to put a backup server at this site, that's one of the options as well. Solar design. Yeah, we built this nice little thing. This is out of Unistrut. It's very burly. It's literally, our rules there were on the top of the water tank, we can mount this little antenna, and they're like, wait, how big is it? Well, 5 inches round and like 2.5 inches deep, and they're like, oh yeah, that's fine, okay, no problem. Wait, that's small, right? So that's their basic antenna. The bigger one's 13 by 13, and then the dishes, of course, can go bigger. But you're not really worried about wind loads, so they don't need to do any structural assessment, right? Thank goodness. The actual solar panels, the primary concern there was the thing flipping over with high winds. So, we put some T-posts into the ground and strapped it together and put a bunch of sandbags on it, and it's probably not going anywhere anytime soon. Over-engineered. The inside of the cabinets, we have a little signal box there. Again, very simple. It's empty pretty much. We've got 2 big batteries, 100 amp hours each, in series for 24 volts, since everything else at the site runs at 24 volts almost. Right, we have a 24 to 12 volt converter to power the router, or the switch, go figure, right? Because the switches need 12 volts usually. We could have sourced a switch that does 24, the router board ones actually do, but whatever. There's a lot of space here. Why would we put space here?
More batteries.
Expansion, more batteries. We have, take a moment to appreciate this, we have 4 80-watt panels here. And how much power does that radio use? 8 watts, right? So there's plenty of power budget here. Very intentional. So we could actually drop a repeater at the site if we wanted to, right here on that shelf, for example. Drop a GR1225 there, plug it right in to 24 volts, keep that in mind. We can easily, we've got 4 more ports on this switch, we can put 4 more point-to-point links, 4 more sector antennas up there, you name it, and there's still plenty of power budget to spare. So these batteries, every morning, half an hour into the sun rising, they're full and they're happy, right? Yeah.
So you went PoE injector as opposed to a PoE switch?
Yeah, and kind of back and forth on that. At this site, there's only one right now.
Yeah.
PoE injectors come free with the antennas anyway, so we're using those.
PoE
there are
switches
PoE switches. The Ubiquity stuff runs on passive anyway, so you can just use it. You do have to be a little careful when you're hooking things up. So I label everything. I'll show you that later. So yeah, that's what the site looks like from the back. Signal box, a bunch of batteries. This was in April. It got a little bit of rain after we installed it in February. So yeah, periodically we go up and move some grass just to make the panels charge faster because we totally need that. But really, it'll just sit there until everything rusts away. And there's the crew. Any questions about the sector site? Yeah, in the back.
What's the maximum distance between that and where you're going?
Yeah, so the maximum distance is about 4.5 miles between the sector site and the furthest client that we're currently supporting. Yeah.
How long has it been there today?
The sector site was installed February 27th of this year, and it's been running continuously 24/7 since then.
Have you had any outages?
We have not had any outages that we're aware of at this site, except for the fuse on the fan for the box that went poof because the fan died. I haven't fixed it yet because it doesn't get hot anyway. It's California. Up here.
You mentioned a camera earlier, but not at this site.
This site, we're not allowed to do a camera, unfortunately, but yeah, there's it's a private cement plant, so they didn't want a camera at it.
You're going to swing back.
Huh?
You're going to talk about cameras at the other
Yes, I'll be at the other sites, yeah.
Are you considering a second site for backup?
Yes, so are we considering a second site for backup? Absolutely. So the challenges here are now that we have this one here and all the clients are pointed at this site, your second site needs to be pretty close to that, right? If we're using 10-degree beam width antennas at our client sites, you only have 10 degrees left or right or up or down from this site to be able to put something. So if anyone wants to buy a house just behind that, do let me know. I will do tower installs, free climbing. I'm dead serious. We'll have fun and pour concrete for you, whatever. Not just for this, but for, I'm sure, a ton of other groups that would love to use that site. And I've got solar panels, too, we can donate to the cause. Okay, so that's the sector site. So let's move on to the client site. So I'm going to use the client site example for one of the shipping containers. So these are the ARKs. They're anywhere from 20 to 40 feet long. Some are steel, some are aluminum, kind of cool. I didn't know they made aluminum shipping containers, but they do. They're easy to drill into. And this is kind of the basic idea. You'll have a solar panel on the roof, and then you have a mast at one end that has a local camera, a local access point, and that allows all your client users, all your CERT members, your Cupertino Citizen Corps folks to stand there, and then your uplink radio. There's not a lot that goes at this site. That's kind of the basic stuff that we thought of. And then there's a phone system inside as well that ties into it. But you don't really need that much. It's a little bit more complicated in the sector side, of course, but that's kind of where it goes. So if we actually go to the equipment list, people were asking this. This will be online as well. You don't have to write it all down. Uplink radio, again, we have that kind of list of, menu item list of pick a radio that you want based on the site. How close are you? How much gain do you need? How big of an antenna can you support? Et cetera, et cetera. Generally, I vote for higher gain antennas. Gives you better noise margin, gives you better rain fade margin, gives you better flexibility. But narrower beam width means if stuff wiggles back and forth, if your mast isn't very stable, you start losing the link a lot more easily. If someone crashes inside the arc, if the earthquake shifts the whole container by a couple feet, that could be enough to lose the beam. If it's only a 10-degree beam width antenna, if it's a 40-degree beam width antenna, it might still be fine, right? Some things to consider. The local access point, Pico stations are great, easy, fast, configurable, single band, but we figured when these are needed, 2.4 gig is not going to be too big of a problem, and when you're the highest point with a big antenna and you're blasting this local area, you're going to be fine anyway. No one's complained so far. Local analog telephone adapter, that's just to control the phones. We decided to go ATA versus SIP phones. Easier to configure, right? And then you have flexibility with your phones, a lot more flexibility. So you can do desk phones, you can have cheaper phones. The phones that you're just throwing around on the tables and running cables to can be literally $10 phones from Amazon or eBay or whatever. You can get wall-mounted ones, you can get the nice little desk ones that are red that ring really nicely, the Bronco ones, whatever you like. Come on, right hands, right? Okay.
One of the major motivations to analog was also SIP phones don't tend to be loud enough. The ringers on SIP phones are really quiet, where analog phones have loud bells. Yeah, so the loud bells and ringers on analog phones are really nice too. And most of those run, so it's 12 volts in, and then it deals with the phone line voltages, so you don't have to worry about that. Local camera, this is one of those challenges. I know some gentleman was asking about the cameras. I still don't have a great answer. I did a lot of research, and this was actually like the last item I bought for each of the sites was which camera do I want to use at this site. There's so many choices out there for cameras. It really comes down to what you specifically need at that site and how you're going to interface with it, right? So I wanted something, that was waterproof, obviously, that was PoE powerable, so I didn't have to run power to it separately on a separate cable. That's a surprisingly big challenge. Now, is it passive PoE? Do you want to use active PoE? Do you want to use PoE plus? If it's a PTZ camera, so a pan-tilt zoom camera, that's 25 watts, it needs PoE plus to function because they're like 25 watts or so. So those are all factors. I ended up with this Filink PW335. I'm pretty happy with that camera. They make a 4mm and 6mm lens, so a wider angle and a narrower angle. And it's got IR at night, and it's pretty useful. It's a fixed one. And it's pretty cheap too. So.
Is it HD?
That one is HD, yeah. So again, how high you go is always a question. They have, it's all across the board, right? So if we're doing, you have to consider too, if you go like too high, if you now pick a 4K camera and you want to stream 4K across this network, you just blew up your entire network, right? You can do a couple frames a second, no problem. But depends on what your utilization is. Or you have, this one actually supports 2 web interfaces simultaneously with multiple users logged into each one. So you can have one that's the HD stream, and that one we'd limit to probably just going back to the EOC if it was needed, but we wouldn't want to use that much because that's a 5 megabit throughput. And then there's the secondary stream, which can be lower resolution, lower bit rate, and you can set that, and then 20 users could be logged in throughout the network watching a 720p 2 frames a second type of video feed, and that would be fine. And the network would be perfectly happy with that. You could consider if we have 20 of these cameras distributed throughout the city and 20 users logged into 20 different cameras, there's a lot of traffic bouncing around, and you very quickly exceed the capabilities of even this high-speed network, right? So, question somewhere? Yeah.
So, what was your bit rate that you were actually able to?
We're going to get there.
Oh.
Don't worry. All right, solar solution. Again, this Tracer 2215BN MPPT controller. For the ARCs, we decided to use actual solar panels. The ones up at the sector, we got a great deal on Craigslist. Great deal on Craigslist, like 50 cents a watt. It was awesome. And then it took me like 3 months to find the stupid thin film clamps to clamp these non-framed borderless solar panels to. Not even kidding. And then we spend 50 or 100 bucks for those, right? It's stupid. So get a panel that you can easily get that has mounting stuff that you can just mount directly to. It makes a big difference. Don't go cheap when you buy stuff. And then the same lead acid batteries, these are off Amazon as well. They're cheap. They're like 85 cents an amp hour, and they're big. And yes, it's more power than we need at these sites. But again, standardizing, it's easy. Every 5 years to replace them anyway. Go from there. Client side. Okay, quick diagram. A little bit more complicated. Again, solar equipment, solar panel. We've got this battery and equipment box. It contains a lot more now. We'll show that in a minute. Up to the mast, we're going to have the uplink antenna, we're going to have the Pico station, and we're going to have the webcam mounted up there. This camera is a 802.3 AF PoE, so it's an active PoE. It's not PoE plus, because this camera doesn't need it. But that you need to keep in mind, because you need to make sure you have the right power going to the right things up here, right? You notice 2 of the items on this mast are 24-volt passive PoE. One of them is active PoE. So make sure you plug the right things in the right places. Again, document, 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 label, 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 everything, color code everything, etc. And lock the box so hams don't go plugging in their 12-volt equipment into this. We're all hands up, come on, this is funny. There we go. All right, and then we have at the front, so this is in the back of the ARC, so buried in the back of the ARC. We want to keep this stuff out of the way, out of sight, out of mind. You never need to interface with this box, ideally. We do have Ethernet jacks and phone jacks then coming to the front of the ARC where you'd be accessing going in and out, and that's kind of the main area. So this is what this ARC looks like, right next to the baseball field that's now a parking lot. Literally halfway through this project, the baseball field turned into a parking lot. I thought someone just pressed a button. Like in James Bond. Okay. So this is the top of the mast here. The webcam right now, we just pointed it down to look at the front of the ARC. There are, of course, safety, security concerns. There are neighbors around. We don't want to just start pointing cameras in neighbors' houses, so things to think about as well. The access point, the Pico station, and then this is the little, this is the high gain antenna, so it's, I don't remember, 17 dBi or something like that, that goes up 20-degree beam width, I think. Solar panel mounted to the top. Again, there are tons of solar panel frames you can buy. They're usually for RVs. If you look around online, they don't support larger panels, and they're expensive, and they're not very robust, and they don't really have any specs because they're only designed to be set up at a campground for the weekend. So I said, hey, let's just make our own. So I bought aluminum stock and some bolts and L brackets, and it's burly, and it's just bolted directly to the top, and it's not going anywhere. So big fender washers into the roof and seal it all up with silicone goop. That'll be happy. It does get dusty though, so I go clean it every once in a while. Again, tons of extra power budget. Okay, this site, 250 watt panel. We're actually talking a little bit more power now altogether, right, if we actually think about it. So you're 10, 15 watts for the camera, 8 watts for the radio again, the Pico station's another 4 or 5 watts thing. The ATA is probably another half watt or something, so all adds up. DC power diagram, we can skip that. This is the inside of the box. A little bit more complicated again, same kind of setup, 2 batteries, solar controller, and then this upper shelf, this is loaded with all the equipment. I used a plastic shelf, zip ties, and the drill, and it works really well. You can just mount everything wherever you want. Labels everywhere. This has 3 different power domains on it, which is really frustrating. So there's 12 volts, 24 volts, and 48 volts for the active PoE, right? So you have to be careful when you're starting to play with all these things. Again, why we don't want this to really be that user accessible, because someone's going to go plug something in and it's going to go poof. So, yeah, that's kind of what that shelf looks like. Diagrams like this for every site. Remember what IP address is everything set to. We're doing static IPs everywhere with DHCP running around for clients coming on. Document, document, document. Okay, one little challenge. So this is the shipping container. This is the net for the foul balls from the baseball field that's now a parking lot. And that's the sector site. Okay, so it's right next to this mast. It's right next to the far side of the backstop. it's right between those two trees that 5 years from now are probably going to grow a little bit more. So keep these things in mind. Where's my Fresnel zone? Well, it's going through that mast and those two trees, right? So these are some of the factors. This site actually is one of the better sites, believe it or not, right? That's 900 feet above ground level, and that's how low it is on the horizon. That gives you an idea of what some of the big challenges. Now, if we go up to Black Mountain, for example, up here, yes, we could get above a lot of these trees, but you're further away, all your links get longer, and then remember those two sites that were right next to the foothills? They wouldn't be able to talk to the system. So they'd have to bounce back to somewhere else or go up to like an intermediate sector site that then relays to the other sector site, and then you have two different routers, and if one of them goes down or the other one goes up, then your whole routing gets nasty really quick. So things to consider. Okay, any questions on the client site?
Heat.
Yeah, heat. Great question. So this is an aluminum shipping container. You'll notice, picture, actually yeah, right here. So these are solar-powered vent fans on the top of this arc.
Oh.
Not all the arcs have these. That one's great for this one, so it actually brings the heat out. The other arcs don't have that, so when we do install at some of those sites that we haven't deployed at yet, I'll be insisting on those because that makes a big difference. It's kind of weird though. You walk in and all of a sudden you hear sucking the hot air out. Which side of the shipping container we put this battery box in as well, because it's a sealed battery box with a couple holes in it, but we wanted, there aren't any rat problems in these, but you want to be careful because they love chewing cables. So things to consider. Great question. Any other client sites? Yeah.
So you mentioned DHCP is like are you allocating DHCP across the entire network for any client? That is, if someone with my site walks up to one site, calls for DHCP, are they going to be sending a call all the way up to the sector site?
No. So that's the nice thing about the MikroTik. So the question was, how does the DHCP allocation work? So at each of the client sites has this MikroTik router plus uplink radio. So that router itself is running your DHCP server. So that means when I connect locally here at this access point, so I'm connecting through this Pico station, this router is the one that's giving me my IP address locally at that site. And then it builds up periodically. The system is continuously rebuilding its routing table, and it's getting all its paths between all the different clients between all the sites. So the OSPF is running between all of these different sites together and doing that. Did I answer that right, Kenneth?
Yep.
Cool.
Different subnet.
I'm learning a lot. Yes. So different subnets. So each of the clients. So DN's ARC is .10.1. .66 is Cupertino. And we are doing some coordinating with other places to try to make things happy, but there's a lack of documentation from projects that have died in the past too. So, yeah. Another question up here? Yeah.
What kind of access control management do you have for the...
Great question. What kind of access control management do we have? So right now, anyone that's in Cupertino Citizens Core that is a disaster service worker has the SSID login for the ARKnet access point. So they can get onto the network. The thought is that you have a splash page that's being worked on that we have that you can then have as your service portal. You can go download your reference documents, you can get copies of the, you can go fill out your forms on there, you can view regularly updated images of each of the sites, you can see, the monitoring and the status. The actual configuration, like the router configurations themselves, those have another higher level of admin access, because the last thing you want is a random client, customer coming up, logging in to your sector site and messing up something with the routing configuration at your sector site, and then the whole network's down until you drive up there and plug into it directly, right? So those sites, definitely you want to lock that down. Yeah.
Have you considered using 44.4 .net IP addresses as opposed to 10? When you move into ham radio, you're actually able to pass, through your IP addresses.
Yeah, I'll leave that for another discussion. Yeah.
In terms of login for the security to the local clients, does it use a password on the network itself, or is it a like a cafe-style login system? No,
so I hate captive portals, and captive portals suck for everything. So we're using, it's true, come on guys. So we're just, it's just an SSID and password for the Wi-Fi network right now. Pretty straightforward. We can do more if we want to do MAC authentication, all sorts of stuff. If we want to pre-approve all the Citizen Core's devices that they auto-connect to any of the sites, whatever, right? Yeah.
IPv6, any consideration for it?
No, I don't want to deal with it. We're not going to run out of IP addresses in this network anytime soon. So, okay. I want to move on to operational testing. This is what operational testing looks like. Sit on a grassy lawn near one of these sites, right? Pick a site anywhere in Cupertino that's activated now, and I can open up my laptop. It auto-associates with the ARKnet network, and then I start logging and typing. So this is the view from one of the cameras at the City Hall site. Okay, so to some of the questions. So simple check that you can do is your signal strength, right? So any of the clients, you can log into any of the routers, and it'll give you, I'm hooked up to the ARKnet sector, which is the primary sector. These are my signal strengths versus time. There's a little blip here, but this one's nice and steady. Certain times of the day at some of the sites, I do see it gets a little bit raggedy. So there is some interference sometimes, but that's gone away recently when I checked. So they might be dynamically changing their channel allocations as well, or someone was not streaming YouTube at their house when I did this test, right? So part of the challenge here is, eventually we're going to get more monitoring running real time, do some statistical analysis, see what are our average throughputs, run some speed tests periodically on the network, and just start logging our signal strengths and see what our uptime effectively would be. One little point of note here, the signal strengths here, so the transmit signal strength from, I'm trying to get this right, from each of these sites up to, the TX signal, so I think I got that backwards. The one with the higher gain antenna, of course, is 10 dB better, right? So it's minus 60 dBm, so it's a much stronger signal from at the DN's ARC than it is from the EOC. So that gives you much better, because we're using a narrower beam width, higher gain antenna at that site. That gives you better, I did totally mess that up. It doesn't get me flipped, oh well. So this one is then our throughput testing. So this is where I sat down at pick a site, and the MikroTik portals have a really nice little speed test built into them. Eventually we'll use iPerf and do some fancier stuff and everything, but simple UDP, throw it up, go transmit, go receive, do transmit and receive at the same time, whatever you want, to whatever endpoint you want in the network, and get some numbers, right? So the EOC itself has the highest gain antenna, and it's getting 25 megabits per second to transmit up to the sector, and 16 down, right? So if we think about why is the down worse, okay, so either the EOC antenna has a higher noise floor because it's in a residential environment and it's pointed past some apartment buildings, so maybe there's a 5 gig system in there. Maybe there's other interference or noise, or maybe the Lehigh sector's transmit antenna isn't as strong. Oh wait, it isn't, because it's a 90-degree beam width antenna, so there's part of your factor there. For the DN's ARC, it's actually the other way around. This is the one that has the poles next to it and everything, so its transmit up is terrible because it's all in the Fresnel zone, so I'm actually going to go to a narrow beam width antenna there. Its downlink is better because it's closer to the sector site. So it's funny how that stuff actually just works out. You actually see the numbers, it actually lines up. If you're doing a passage through the whole system, you're going to see half of those averages, roughly. And that we can fix with doing some different tricks up at the sector site. You can, all sorts of things, multiple streams, you can change our bandwidth, we can adjust that as needed. Now,
Did you say the channels were dynamically?
so right now we're fixed channel on this one. We can at any time go and manually change the sectors one, and then all the clients will automatically reassociate to it because they're scanning. And that was intentional as well. So if we did have a sector site outage, you could drive up with someone's truck with an Omni on it and have it beacon as I am the sector, right? Remember me? And they'll all connect no matter what channel it's on, and bandwidth stuff. So, good question. Okay, almost done here. So this is kind of operational testing. This is the webcam that's looking at a daytime view and a nighttime view. That's just pointed down right now. It's not very useful, but you can see people going in and out. You can tell if the doors are open on the ARC, which is good enough to tell you, hey, is someone activated there? Is that why they're not answering the radio? Or, hey, all the supplies are pillaged and laying out on the ground in front of it. Someone went and robbed the site, right? So useful. This is the phone hanging at the front with the little junction box. You can plug in a second phone right away, and you can plug in 2 network devices. So mesh networking, those folks that raised their hand earlier, if you want to come in and now plug in your mesh network to this, the local mesh network can now be tied into ARKnet very easily. Or you can tie it into the 2.4 gig access point. So lots of flexibility there. That's kind of what we wanted to do, allow people to play with it. This is my favorite camera. This is the expensive camera up at City Hall. And it's a pan-tilt zoom camera that can point all around. And it's currently looking out at the courtyard, and that's where it's parked. And it just can see the Cupertino library, and at night it can see the lights of the library. Ooh. Right? Again, if this is filled with 500 residents that are all banging at the door with pitchforks and trying to find the governor because or the mayor because he's not, I don't know, giving them food supplies or something, then you'll know, hey, maybe we need to send some police supplies here. And that's kind of the thought of cameras. Plus, cameras are very visual, so as we're building the system for people, it's a great way for them to understand, oh, cool, I can see something that's far away from me that I can't get to because the roads are currently fissured and broken and fractured. And you can see this. Question? Yeah.
You gatewayed this to the internet?
Not yet. It will be eventually, primarily for configuration reasons, that we can work on it more easily, so we don't have to drive up to one of the sites every time. But we don't currently have a gateway to the internet. There's not much need for it, besides configuration. So. And allowing the Russian hackers in. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to blurt. My bad.
So you're
but
say
you can just go to whatever the nearest site is, and you have access to everything.
Yeah. So you drive up to any of the client sites. They each have the same local 2.4 gig access point.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And your stuff will automatically connect. You can have an access, a local access point in your truck and drive up to any of these sites, and it'll connect, and then your SIP phone in your truck will now magically start working, literally. Right, so Kenneth actually does that. He's about a 5 gig one that slaps on the roof of a car and drives down Stevens Creek and gets signal all the way down Stevens Creek because of a straight line of sight shot from the sector. Right, so that's kind of neat. Okay, so the future, just finishing up here. This is currently the splash page. It's just a simple splash page. What do we want to do with this, right? So that's a great question. We've built up a basic system. Right now we have two, so the EOC and one client site and the sector site up. So right now the site is really simple. We haven't gotten very far. It's 3 sites are up. We're about to deploy the service center site as well. The main thing is we now have a system that works and runs and can be used to do stuff. What sort of stuff? Well, great. Okay, so we have an earthquake communications drill December 10th. So that's really where I want to do stuff. I want to have Cupertino Citizen Corps members use their phones and start playing with it. I want the SIP phones to be used during this activation. I want the EOC to be able to look at these images from the different sites and see how those are useful in their operational planning. What other things could we add to it? What sort of applications do they want? Is the IRC client working well? Is the SIP client on people's cell phones? Is that useful? What are the sorts of things that the city would like to make this a more capable network that's functional? So this goes back to the very early slide of what do we actually want to do with this, right? And that's a big question. Yeah, we have a network up and running. It's cool. I had a lot of fun. We spent half our budget and we got tons more. And we're still, going along. So activate additional sites. Yeah, I'll keep building out sites. We'll keep slowly adding them to it. As we figure out what kind of cookie cutter setup works really well, the ARKs, we have that nice setup. You can just go place one bulk order for that amount of stuff. It's about, I don't know, $2,000 worth of equipment per ARK to bring up another ARK, right? And then it's up. And then one of the long-term ones is how do we interface with other cities? We already have the county interested in using our sector site as a backup backhaul site for some of their links. And anytime you put up a radio site, people want to get on it, right? So that's how it works. So that's kind of the high level. A bunch of credits. Jim Overhofer, he couldn't be here today. He's Cupertino areas head. Kenneth in the back. He's the other primary lead on the project with myself. The Lehigh Permanente Cement Plant is awesome. We're having a hardest time finding a site. The city was having a hard time being able to wrangle whatever leverage arm. Lehigh was awesome. Bunch of resources here. There's a ton of stuff about networking that I didn't cover. A bunch of these are online. They're very good presentations talking about link budget analysis, doing calculations, all that. Those you can find in the links as well that'll be published. Don't worry, that's the one you want to take a picture of because it'll be, there you go. Yeah, so that's about it, and right on schedule. Wow. Whew. All right, thank you. And I'm here as long as you guys want because it's lunch break. I'm giving a talk in this room afterwards, and Kenneth's giving a talk at 2 o'clock as well. Feel free to come ask questions. Thank you. How you doing? Hey, good. Please ask away.